CNBC-TV18.
Well, hello and welcome to News Centre. I'm Ashmit Kumar. The Bar Council of India has allowed for foreign law firms and lawyers to practice international law and arbitration matters in the country in India. Now, the permission, however, will be on the basis of reciprocity. The Bar Council says that opening up will be regulated to ensure that it is mutually beneficial for lawyers for India as well as lawyers looking at India as a potential market. In fact, to take this discussion forward, I'm now joined by Satvik Varma. He's a senior advocate, as well as Mr. Suhail Nathani, a managing partner at Economic Laws Practice. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Varma, let me come to you first. You've studied law in Harvard. You're admitted to practice in New York. You've worked in Wall Street. You were also a partner at Undivided Amarchand. So you tick all the boxes as far as areas that can get impacted by the notification of these rules. Tell us your first takeaway as far as foreign lawyers being allowed here are concerned. Is it an opportunity, or will it prove to be a challenge to the existing firms and lawyers practicing in India?
Thanks, Ashmit. It's always a delight to be back on your shows. So thank you for having me today as well. It's definitely not going to be a challenge for Indian law firms. I think Indian law firms are extremely creative, and they are in many ways ahead of the curve, and they know how to innovate fairly efficiently and in a time-bound, smart manner. So I don't think it's going to pose any challenge whatsoever. It's a welcome move. I think we need to consider a couple of things. It's a move that's come very close on the heels of the visit of the President of the Law Society of England and Wales. It's something that's happened right after the Delhi Arbitration Week, which was a celebrated event held in Delhi, where the Chief Justice of India spoke. Also close on the heels of the ABA event which took place. So clearly, India and the Indian legal market has been a focus. The devil lies in the detail. I think the Bar Council still needs to work out a lot of the details as it stipulates in the regulations. And I think we should all wait, or it'll be wise for us to wait for those before we can really move forward. But a definite good move for business in India, good move for the development of the legal industry in India. And the fact that the Bar Council has promulgated these rules is also indicative of the fact that the big lobby that was preventing this entry from happening has now been comforted, which was largely the litigation folks. So I think all in all, a positive step forward, and we will need to wait and see before we deliver a verdict on this.
Well, also joining us is Mr. Nathani. Mr. Nathani, thank you so much for joining us. Again, the same question to you. In 2018 is when we had the Apex Court partly allowing foreign lawyers. Since then, it's taken 5 years for the BCI to come out with these rules, the Bar Council to come out with these rules. Your first take on that, is this a challenge, or is this an opportunity? I asked that question because the areas which the foreign lawyers and law firms are being allowed into, which is mergers, acquisitions, this for very many law firms is their bread and butter. So I asked that question, challenge or opportunity?
Well, any change in status quo is an opportunity. Is the opportunity without challenges? I don't believe it is without challenges. It will bring its own challenges. And while I agree that Indian law firms are able to and will indeed step up to the plate, there is also this whole situation of having restrictions placed on Indian law firms for several years. So, for example, websites, what kind of advertisement, if any, all those things have been under strict control of the Bar Council of India. And while I appreciate that foreign law firms operating in India have to adhere to the Bar Council rules, the fact is that all of them are overseas based, and the rules in those countries are fundamentally different to what we are operating under over here. So yes, an opportunity, but not without challenges.
Mr. Varma, let me take that across to you. When we talk of whether it's an opportunity or challenge, let's first talk about the interest there. Given your international experience, what can you tell us in terms of your interactions with foreign lawyers and law firms? Is that energy, excitement there to look at India as a potential market? The Bar Council talks of potential FDI developing India into an international arbitration hub. Do you see that interest overseas to be a part of this India story?
The short answer is yes. I think there clearly is an interest, and the interest has been around. I graduated from my master's in America 20 years ago, and I can tell you from experience then that almost every big law firm has had an India practice desk, and that number has only grown. The hub for some has moved from the United States now to Asia, Singapore, Hong Kong. London has always been a bit of a melting pot where there's been a lot of people and a lot of big firms with their India teams. So yes, there's a huge amount of interest and there's a huge amount of focus towards this. Right now, keeping that in mind, what we also need to consider, Ashmit, is what the rules allow. At some level, and when I first read these, I read the rules a couple of times over. Not much has changed in a practical sense, in my mind, or to my mind. And the reason I say that is the only thing that seems like a marked difference is the fact that post the Supreme Court judgment in BCI Balaji, where they were not even allowed to do non-litigious stuff, these regulations allow that, right? But as the conditions have been stipulated, it has to be on a reciprocal basis, which is number one. It has to be on matters that are not connected with Indian law, so foreign law. There are restrictions and stipulations on who these services can be rendered to. And the end user of those services, in most cases, also has to be a foreign party, which is another restriction. And it also clarifies to say that, look, if you are, Satvik Varma working at a law firm in England and you file your returns in England and you're registered in India, you still can't practice on the Indian law aspect. So in that sense, not much has changed. But yes, I think it is going to be, it definitely brings about a change where these firms will be looking to move into India and set up shop. At least some of the big ones will be. And we've already seen press reports of some of the big firms reporting, stating their interest.
Right. Well, speaking of setting up shop, Mr. Nathani, let me talk to you about the detail as a part of these rules there. A lot of compliance is required on part of foreign lawyers or law firms looking to enter the Indian market. In fact, just for registration, I believe there's a long list of about 11 documents that have to be submitted for being allowed to participate in this India story. The question I'm asking is, are these important guardrails that are required to ensure that the space remains firmly regulated? Or will it serve perhaps as another case of red tape that may come in the way of genuine interest as here as a part of the India story?
So, we can't start off looking at something that as though it's going to be red tape or an impediment. We assume these are going to be guardrails, but we have to look at how other markets that liberalized and who had similar rules eventually shaped up. See, it's very important if these are intended to be guardrails, they operate as such. The fact of the matter is that there is a lot of detail that remains to be A, interpreted and B, implemented. So if you have those clarified or implemented in one case, you will know what is going on. So the point I would like to make is that there are two fundamental changes, okay? One is that the foreign law firms can come here and do arbitrations as long as one of them, their clients, has an office outside of India. So it doesn't matter whether it's under Indian law or foreign law, they can come here and do arbitrations. Arguably, they were doing that in any case. The second situation is that there is no bar on advising on transactional matters. Okay, and the regulation is very clear that it says they shall be allowed to practice on transactional work, corporate work, such as joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions, intellectual property matters, drafting of contracts, and other related matters on a reciprocal basis. So this gives them opening into the Indian legal market. And I believe that, it is going to be a very interesting opportunity for many of them who will be knocking at our doors for a very long time. But it is going to be subject to how the Bar Council is able to regulate them, because in some of the markets they have operated, these guardrails have not been that effective because you structure around them.
Sure. We're running out of time, Mr. Varma. Let me come to you for a final word. As Mr. Nathani was pointing out, there's a distinction that the rules make that as far as foreign lawyers, law firms are concerned, will only be allowed as far as transactional issues are concerned. So mergers, acquisitions, contract, drafting of contracts, that's a space where they're allowed, not litigation. Let me ask you a question about looking ahead, perhaps at the future. At what stage can we begin to consider that question of even allowing foreign lawyers and law firms into litigation, seeing a foreign lawyer compete against one of the senior advocates, arguing against you in the top court of the country? When do we see that debate?
Well, if left to me, never. But look, I think we have to look at this from a evolutionary process, right? It is going to be good. As Suhail pointed out, any change comes with its own challenges. Let's take, for example, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to keep it brief, but live streaming. A lot of people have said live streaming is not going to be the best thing because it's going to restrict the bonhomie enjoyed between the bar and the bench. Contrastingly, the arguments yesterday held before the constitutional bench relating to the Maharashtra Assembly are so beautiful that at lunch, all of my colleagues and I were looking at it and learning from it. So I think that it's a similar change. I think we're going to be, we're still far removed from litigation opening up. Just to give you a perspective, Delhi saw 14,000 registration of lawyers last year and has over 128,000 lawyers registered on its rolls as of date, a large majority of which are in litigation. So that's not a space that the Bar Council, according to me, is going to allow, and perhaps for good and right reason, to open the doors on. There's still a lot of detail. I think Suhail mentioned we need to see what happens. I also think there's a lot that needs to be formulated. For example, there's incongruity between the definition of international commercial arbitration under the Arbitration Act and as it's defined under these regulations. So even in these arbitrations, presumably applying principles of law, they'll only be able to advise on the foreign law aspects, again, to that end user. So I think as a first measure and, just letting the ink dry up on this, I think it's a great way forward. It's a great step forward. It's a great move. A lot of it is going to get, the creases are going to get ironed out in good time. And we should welcome it with open arms and not with fear. Trepidation is okay, but not with fear for sure, as if it's going to uproot us.
Right, Mr. Varma. Right, Mr. Varma. I'd like to thank both of our panelists, Mr. Varma as well as Mr. Nathani, for joining us and sharing their insights on this subject. But with that, we're slipping into a very short break. But coming up on the other side, U.S. has confirmed former Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti as the country's ambassador to India. A discussion with Professor Haresh Pant and former diplomat Anil Trigunayath when we return.
You are watching News Center. The US has finally announced an ambassador for India. The appointment of former LA Mayor Eric Garcetti has been confirmed by the Senate 2.5 years after he was first nominated by the White House. A Biden loyalist and co-chair of the campaign, Garcetti's confirmation hearings have been rocked by scandals. So who is Garcetti? 52-year-old, studied at Columbia, Oxford and the London School of Economics, a co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign and someone who is considered as a Biden loyalist. Former mayor of Los Angeles, he in fact was the youngest mayor in 100 years. He held the post from 2013 to 2022. His website says he's an avid jazz pianist and a photographer. And it was really the Rick Jacobs scandal that impacted his confirmation hearings for over 2.5 years. Not just that, he was also dropped as a possible contender for Biden's cabinet due to these allegations. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley had put a hold on Garcetti's nomination, and Naomi Seligman, a former communications director for Garcetti, said he's unfit to be an ambassador. Even Democratic senators like Mazie Hirono, Sherrod Brown and Mark Kelly opposed him in the final hearing. Finally, he managed a confirmation by 52-42. Among other controversies, he has been criticized for trying to find middle ground during protests against the killing of George Floyd. And there were also corruption allegations against the LA City Council, which Garcetti once headed. The White House has said that many of the claims on the Rick Jacobs scandal and allegations against Garcetti for ignoring the allegations, the sexual harassment, the sexual assault allegations against his aide have already been debunked in various reports. And President Biden has backed this candidate throughout the last 2.5 years. He has also been in the news for his comments on the Citizenship Amendment Act. He has said that he would bring up human rights and discrimination via the CAA, and this will be among the core pieces of his engagement with India. Let's now go across to Ambassador Anil Trigunath, former Indian ambassador, and also Harsh Pant of Observer Research Foundation. Harsh, let me begin with you. Give us a sense of how these allegations, which have really plagued Eric Garcetti's nomination process, confirmation process over the last 2.5 years, how will that impact his tenure here in India now?
Hi, Parikshit. I hope there's that once the U.S. Congress and Senate have finalized his nomination, approved his nomination, there should not be that big of an issue. But certainly, I think this whole thing has been clouded by this, these accusations, counter accusations, and the entire process that unfolded in Washington has been quite, it was to use a word which undiplomatic to put it. Very casually. In a sense, there has been this big sense from the Biden administration that Eric Garcetti needs to go, and he's their person. But then he got embroiled in this process where things came out about how he handled a particular accusation, and then it snowballed into a larger issue, which I think, of course, the Republicans used it because of political reasons, but many in the Democratic Party itself were torn by this issue. So I think he has had a very difficult 26 months.
Right.
So one would have hoped that after all that, perhaps President Biden would not nominate him again, but he was renominated earlier this year. Once that the president felt that he had enough numbers in the Senate to muster support for him, and then he has been approved now. So in the real world of diplomacy, perhaps it would not make an impact. He would come here. After all, the big issue was that why has there been no ambassador to India for such a long period? But I think this issue of what has dogged him in Washington will certainly impact the image and the credibility that he brings to the table.
Right. Ambassador Trigunath, coming to you, despite the allegations in the Rick Jacobs scandal, that is for ignoring sexual misconduct, allegations against his key aide, President Biden stood by him. The White House put out statements of confidence that most of the reports have given him a clean chit. What does this say about the ambassador who's now coming to India, the trust that the president reposes in Eric Garcetti?
Well, as you know, that USA has a very simple system, which is called a spoil system, whereby after an election, the president normally confers various plum postings and assignments on the people who have either funded them or have stood politically with them. So this is one of those cases where Eric Garcetti, who is also his friend, and so President Biden has stood by it. But in a way, I'm happy that finally they are posting an ambassador to India, because Biden administration has attached great priority to their relationship, and it has often been talked about that an absence of an ambassador was definitely affecting the relationship and the interactions. But what, in my view, is going to be more difficult for him is that some statements that he made during the Senate hearing, that is about that he'll be taking up human rights issues, will raise the CA issue and all those. Those are actually, in my view, going to cause him a little more difficulty in being acceptable to India, as it would be seen as interfering in the internal affairs of India, which the government and the dispensation would not like, especially as, of course, he'll be left with 1.5 years of term because both Biden and Prime Minister Modi will be going in for the elections next year. So I think that if he continues on the path that he claimed at the in the Senate hearings, I think he'll going to have a difficult period here. But of course, the relationship is very strong, and I hope he'll bring something better on the table. And he takes the views on the basis of not colored perceptions or hearsay, but also on the basis of the facts and to enhance the relationship between the two countries. Because we all know that USA uses democracy, project democracy rather, or the human rights and all as a tool of their diplomacy. They have nothing to do with the reality, grand reality in their own country. As you know, the Mexican president recently said that Mexico has better democracy than the United States of America. So we have seen all what happens in the country, and then they want to preach the others. So if he's a political ambassador, it is understood very well, but he has to play his cards rather well if he is here, and not in a very constructive manner that he's supposed to have started off.
Right. Harsh, do you feel that he has possibly started off on a wrong foot with the Indian government? Yes, we would welcome a US ambassador, considering that India and US have very, very close ties, are going to be working very closely together on trade issues, on semiconductors, on geopolitics, on Indo-Pacific. But the fact that he made those comments about human rights, discrimination via the Citizenship Amendment Act, saying that this will be at the very core of his engagement with India, do you think that could make him start off on the wrong foot with the Indian government? Or this is how ambassadors usually talk during the Senate hearings, confirmation hearings?
I think this is how they generally talk, and because they have to appeal to a certain audience that is looking at them and that is vetting them. And in this particular case, because he was, he was facing such a difficult ride, he had to appease the so-called progressive wing in his own party. So I'm not surprised that he made those statements. I think what will be important is how he conducts himself and what his priorities are when he comes to India, because I think what we have seen in the last few years of Biden administration, that you would recall when Biden himself was elected, there were widespread concerns about the human rights agenda, the democracy agenda, and we have not seen any of them actually impacting the dynamic of Indo-US relationship. So Biden actually has doubled down on India relationship. He has actually invested a lot, both bilaterally as well as multilaterally when you look at Quad. So I don't particularly see Eric Garcetti taking a view that is divergent of what the Biden administration has taken, and I'm sort of optimistic that the underlying strategic realities are such that India and the US have to work together, irrespective of some of the differences that they may have on certain issues, which are very natural, into democracies. So I would not, I would certainly, I think there will be many in India who would look at his statements very carefully and would assess them, and perhaps he will have to then, when he comes to India, really make extra effort in ensuring that that image that he carries of someone who is more interested in the internal politics of India than on substantive strategic engagement, that he has to take care of himself. But I think by and large, it seems to me that given the trajectory of Biden administration, given the trajectory of Indo-US relationship, I don't particularly see him, going off track from that.
Right. My final question to you, Ambassador Trigunayat, considering the fact that he's coming at a time when President Biden will possibly run again. There's going to be an election in the US next year. There are strong political priorities that the Biden administration will have. What kind of priorities will Eric Garcetti come to India with?
Well, I think that there are several things as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned. So in that, essentially, we still have this trade agreement that is still on the pipeline, then creating a greater trust between the two countries. He will, of course, be pursuing the US line as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned and India's role in this. Secondly, he's also coming at a time, or will come at a time probably, when India is still continuing with the G20 presidency and his approach of strategic autonomy, and how the US, in the larger scheme of things, like his president has done, will be navigating through these priorities. So, in the bilateral domain, there is plenty because the China remains their major threat. The Russia has emerged as another major threat for the US interest, which has been talked about in their own various reports that have come out recently. So I think that India is a partner of choice at the moment, or partner of compulsion for that. I mean, so in my view, I think that the US would try to keep India on a better platform than getting involved, as Professor Pant also said, better talk about the issues that will help the Indian public opinion. So I
Right.
think that as a U.S. ambassador, he will probably briefed by Mr. Blinken and others exactly how to conduct himself.
Right. Ambassador Trigunath Harshpan, thank you very much for joining us here on News Center, giving us your view of Eric Garcetti, how his nomination and confirmation hearings actually took place, and what will happen once he reaches India as well. Thank you once again for being with us. That's all we have time for on this edition of News Center. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.